Okay, I think we're about to get started. So if you haven't already done so, grab your last drink, last plate of food. Before I introduce the man who's going to be introducing the speaker, I just want to take care of a few administrivia. My name is John Jackson. I'm the Outreach and Communications Librarian here at the William H. Hannon Library. And I just want to call your attention to a few things. First of all, on your seats there is a small quarter sheet feedback form. If you get a chance, please fill that out. And there's a little box over there to the left of the roses. If you could let us know how we're doing, if you enjoy this event, if you want to see other events like this in the future. If you have any feedback, please let us know. Every person who enters that is automatically entered into a drawing for a $100 Amazon gift card at the end of the semester. So we really do appreciate your feedback and want to encourage that as much as possible. The other things I just want to mention is that tonight's event is going to be recorded. So if you need to leave early or if you missed something, there will be the chance to review it. Also, there's going to be a Q&A at the end for about 15 minutes. So if you have any questions, go ahead and hold that until that moment. So what I will do next is introduce Dr. Matheson, who will be introducing tonight's speaker for Faculty Pub Night. Take it away.
Good evening. These are nice events, aren't they? I get the view, you don't. Anyway, my name is David Matheson. I'm a faculty member in the College of Business. And I want to introduce Yongsun. 1991 was my first year as chair of the management department. It was also the year we hired a gifted young Korean scholar. We knew his potential. His dissertation was nominated Best for the 1991 Academy of International Business Meetings. He came with considerable executive experience in Seoul, Korea, plus government research experience. We saw in him an excellent colleague with considerable teaching skills. His appointment, we felt, represented a major move forward in advancing our department goals towards internationally. Fast forward, 2016. Yongsun Paik has far exceeded our expectations. Fulbright Scholar, 4 books, 50 plus publications, journal publications, 7 book chapters, memberships on 4 editorial boards. Yongsun is currently a full professor of international and business management. Is that correct? Did I say that title correctly? Also our director of the Center for Asian Business. Before he came to Loyola Marymount University, he taught at the University of Washington, Thunderbird School of Global Management. Now I'm going to say this wrong. Help me on this one. Yongsun University. How bad am I? Yeah, Yongsun. And Sogang University. He also served as a country economist at the Export-Import Bank of Korea and a researcher at the Ministry of Finance in Korea. Yongsun's primary research interests focus on international human resources, global strategic alliances, is it coming out right, and Asian Pacific business studies. I should also note as an aside, he holds a master's degree in, of all things, Latin studies. And he knows 5 languages, Latin American studies. I'm sorry, yes, Latin American studies. See, I'm getting corrected already. Yongsun and I were at a conference, I think it was Las Vegas. And within 30 minutes, I saw him speak 4 languages. He spoke Chinese, he spoke Korean, he spoke Spanish, and he spoke English. You're amazing, Yongsun, in terms of your language skills. Yongsun currently serves as on the editorial board for the Journal of World Business, Thunderbird International Business Review, and European Journal of Cross-Cultural Competence and Management. Boy, that's a mouthful. Most importantly, let me just speak informally. I consider Yongsun and his wife Angie among some of my closest friends. They've been in our home many times. Yongsun and I share a perspective of, we have leadership roles in the Presbyterian Church, and we talk a lot about that. I consider Yongsun a very close friend. Welcome, Yongsun Paik.
Thank you so much, David, for a nice introduction. He's a minister, so he exaggerates. Has anybody ever taken his class? And he liked to exaggerate. But anyway, I appreciate your great introduction. I can't believe that it's been 25 years here in LMU. So, as you said, I was a young scholar 25 years ago, but I also passed the 60s now. So time is flying, and before I start my talk, I'd like to recognize that some of the people that means a lot to me. First, that I have my uncle and aunt representing my family. Actually, they live in Ann Arbor, Michigan. It's too cold, so every winter they migrate from Michigan to California and stay here for 3 months. So they happen to be here, and my daughter, she flew in yesterday from Northern California, and so I'm glad that she's here with me today. And also my former the colleague and boss, and my department chair, Dr. Gray, and Dr. Matheson, and my colleague, Dr. Ivan Montiel, and another colleague from finance department and accounting. And most importantly, my students, and I expect a lot more because they told me they are coming, but actually only a handful of students, and then so I really appreciate that. That's right, and the students that from my class and also that from the former classes. So I only have 40 or 45 minutes, and so I'm going to start my talk. And here's a book I wrote with my colleague. Who's not here. I asked Charlie, why do we do this? And then now he became my new boss. So he's the department chair. So he's too busy, and he said that you just do it and then promote our book. So I got the order from my new chair, Dr. Vance, and so I cannot take the full credit for this book. And actually that this is the 3rd edition, and the first time that we published this book was 10 years ago. So at least we changed the design. So this was the first design of this book. A little bit rusty. And this is the second design, the second edition. And finally, here's a third one, which came out last year, 2015. So publisher said that you're lucky if you can make the second edition, but we are really fortunate that we were able to make the 3rd edition. So I think that somebody's buying this book, I guess. So, so I'd like to begin with, what has inspired me to write this book. As David introduced me, I came from Korea 32 years ago. So 1984 was the year I arrived in Los Angeles, and then I vividly remember that the LA Olympic was going on, so I cannot forget. But at the time, I was more Korean, right, naturally, because so I was trying to watch the athletes or the events or the sport event that the Koreans are competing, but nobody's actually televising that, so I was not able to watch that. Anyway, so my first encounter, I went to University of Texas, Austin, to pursue my master's degree in Latin American studies. So it's kind of strange, right? As a Korean, and as he mentioned that, I learned several languages, actually. In addition to those 4 languages, I learned 3 more, Japanese, Chinese, and then I forgot, German, right? But I cannot speak all of them fluently, but at least that I can comprehend and read those the articles. So the first question when I arrived in Austin, Texas, that people asked me where I'm from. And I told them I'm from Korea. And then they asked me that from South or North Korea. I never thought about that. Well, of course, there's only one Korea. So, but after a while, I recognized that who I am and how that the people in other countries perceive. So it is the first time actually that you come out of your country, you recognize that how the different people perceive you. So it was not really a culture shock, but that was kind of shocking, that simple question, where are you from? And I said, I'm from Korea, and then, but they didn't take it for granted, and they're curious about I'm from North or South Korea. Then, of course, that a lot of interesting episode I can share with. Just quickly share that one of the things, and then I was surprised at how much personal space that the people in the country were enjoying. So every time I queued in front of ATM, I was cutting to the line, and I didn't know that's the line. And because that we stand like 5 or 6 feet apart between persons. And also another thing that I was really surprised that the people say so many times, excuse me, excuse me. They didn't even touch my body, but they keep saying excuse me. So I had no idea why that the people keep saying excuse me, you're fine. So I was born and raised in a country where that there was no personal space whatsoever. So in my high school, I was commuting in a municipal bus, and about 200 people were packed in the bus. The moment I got on bus, and I didn't have my personal space. About 10 people completely surrounded me, and maybe 5 people stepping on my toe, and not a single person said, excuse me. So it was a real culture shock. Okay, I can go on, even though, thank you. I didn't know that why people say thank you so frequently for no reason. And actually, my favorite example was that my students here. I say this all the time in my class, but my students that when they finish with their test, midterm, they just finished my midterm. I haven't yet grade. Some of them, actually, most of them, when they turn in their midterm or a final exam, they will say thank you. I had no idea that why the students are saying is thank you. Because I don't give an easy test, and they know that my reputation is that I'm a very demanding professor. So, I just couldn't figure out that some of the things that I think it's just the cultural norms and etiquette. Then I read the story about the American expat living in South Korea. It's one of the small newspapers in the Puget Sound up in Seattle. And the story goes like this. So American expat lived in a neighborhood only exclusively among themselves. So they never wants to, get adjusted to the Korean culture and etc. One day, the wife of the American expat went out to the antique store and bought a chamber pot. Do you know chamber pot? And then some of the old generation here, and then probably they know. So chamber pot is the one that in the old days it was used for when nature calls you in the cold winter night. And then I had my own chamber pot when I was living in Korea. So I solved my problem that when I was a kid using the chamber pot. And she served, using the chamber pot, she served soup. So these Y generation or whatever, the millennial kids, they don't understand what I'm talking about. But so that was another very interesting anecdote. Gee, this is a very interesting story, okay? So the people, they just don't know how to behave in the foreign or the different environment. Then I myself went back to South Korea, and actually that I experienced a severe counterculture shock. I didn't know that I have been changed. So 5 years after I taught here, I visited South Korea, and I didn't like anything in South Korea at all. So finally I decided I better live in this country, and then I know that South Korea owe a lot to the U.S., and then it's a country who actually that they saved from the communist threat from North Korea during the Korean War. And actually, I was fed in the PL 480, which is an aid from the U.S. So I thought maybe it's a good time to pay back to the American people for what I received. So then I take a look at, thanks Dwayne and Charlotte, to my favorite former student from MBA program. So they just got here. And I've been waiting for you for a long time. So we take a look at existing the books in the international human resource management. And it was mainly focused on the design for the human resource, the specialists, rather than the generalist managers or the leaders of the organization, and who actually make some key decisions and then come up with some important strategic decisions. And also we found that many of the textbooks also focus on just simply expatriate management. So it is just a one-way focus, and how as an expat, my uncle actually used to work for the Dutch company, so about 30 or 40 years. So he wasn't actually literally his career was the expat. So we thought that we need a new book which actually has more comprehensive, broader coverage of this important issue of international human resource management. So in a nutshell, this book is about the global talent management. So even though, for example, a country like China, there are so many people living in China, but you ask the companies operating in China, there's a very serious shortage of skilled or talented managers and workers. So that's why that the human resource management function is elevated to the strategic level. And I'm sorry to say to this, but in the past, human resource management is considered to be a dumping ground, and somebody who doesn't have any particular skill that you go to HRM because that you don't have a marketing skill, accounting and finance skill, so you just count the coupons and then count the numbers of the people and then et cetera. But now we changed that. It used to be called the personnel, and then now it has a strategic implications, so it elevated the significance of the HRM. So this book, unlike the other textbook or any other books, and then it has, as I said, a much more comprehensive coverage of the HRM issues, and particularly the macro and micro. And as David explained, that I was trained as an economist. That's my undergrad major, economics. So I worked at the Export Bank of Korea for 5 years as a country economist. So I have a macroeconomics background, and Charlie Vance, my co-author, he's the HR specialist, and he majored in the organizational behavior and human resource management. So it was a good fit, and our skills are very complementary to each other. So that is one of the major sort of distinction or difference between this book and other books. So maybe that the readers appreciate this particular aspect of this book. So it talks about immigration, and it also talks about the offshoring of not only the job but also the people. And one of the new increasing phenomenon is that we have an increased number of the contingent and more flexible labor workforce. So this particular book covered what are the implications of these sort of new features of the global workforce, and how is it going to impact the performance of the companies operating across borders. This is good news for the students, and because I know that sometimes you're concerned about getting a job after your graduation, but if you look at the global market, and actually there is a higher demand than supply. So I always tell my students, if you cannot find a job here, you can get a job in Mexico or in China, and even though in Spain that the unemployment rate is really high, if you happen to have the right skills and knowledge, and you can find a job. Seriously. So on top of my head, one of the statistics in China, every year they need about 50,000 middle-level managers that they're working for in multinational corporations. So this is a good news, really. And in terms of the area, which part of the world needs the most these skillful workers, it is Asia. Okay, so if you need to learn that the second language, and I would say probably the Chinese would be the next one. So we have Professor Wang here, so you can learn Chinese from her. So anyway, the Asia lead the labor shortage. The reason is very simple. Maybe that I want to test my audience. That's sort of my job, right? The testing. And then when I was at economist at the Export-Import Bank of Korea, that I was grading country. That was my job. I give A to, for example, U.S. and B. That was a lot of fun, you know, giving a grade to country. So can you name that the 5 major trading partners with the state of California? Mexico, my students should know this. Mexico, Canada, right? Japan, Korea, China, that's right, okay. So those are the top 5 major trading partners. So Asia has become the center of the global economic growth. We know that the Chinese economy is kind of slowed down, and then it will affect the U.S. economy and vice versa. But still, if you take a look at the most vibrant the area in terms of the world economic growth, and still in Asia. So some of you know the BRICS, right? So the Brazil, Russia is sometimes Asia, right? It's not all the time, but depending on their mood, and sometimes they go to Europe and then they go to Asia. So India and China. So if you take a look at the survey results, about some 45% employees surveyed, they cited difficulties in finding the right people to hire. And because of these reasons, the lack of IT knowledge and foreign language ability, insufficient work experience, and absence of interpersonal skills. As you see here, it's mostly the soft skills, not the hardware skills. In America, about 41%. And Europe and Africa, it's much lower. Let me see if how can I click on this? Mouse on the podium? No. This is just one of the articles which inform that the surprising global shortage of skilled workers. So the key point of the article is that, as I said, even though that there's a lots of people unemployed, when it comes to a skilled workforce, is that there's quite a severe the lack or the shortage of these workers. Let's see. How do I go back? Could you help me? Thanks. Okay. This is the article from the New York Times. There's some kind of grave concern about that we are continue to lose these skillful workers or knowledge workers to mainly China. So Chinese government is aggressively attracting the expats to return their home. So they provide the tax incentives, and they provide a very lucrative the compensation, financial package, and etc. The reason I'm saying that is because obviously it has to do with the U.S. immigration policy for past 5 or 6 years that we are not able to keep rolling the ball, and still it's kind of a stalemate. So I'm not 100% sure about that. What will be the gist of our immigration policy? But some other countries, Canada and also particularly China, they try to recruit and all their the top talented people back to China. So I think that there's some important lesson that we have to learn from other countries' immigration policy, because this country is built upon the immigrants, right? Dwayne hasn't changed, so okay. Could you? Okay, so could you wait that in 25 minutes? By the time he's going to forget his question, I hope. So after we wrote this textbook, look at this, and then these are all the important and interesting books written on the human resource management, engaging and integrating a global workforce, which is that economist that the intelligence unit put out. This is by economist. And Global Human Capital Trends at 2015, the Deloitte University, Deloitte Touche. And this book is from, let's see, I think Accenture. So there's another important book came out which mainly emphasized that the global talent management and how it is important. What matters most is the human being. So if I just quickly define that, what do you mean by global talent management? And the global workforce has become that the source of sustainable competitive advantage. So depending upon what kind of people you have in your company, right, and how we're going to actually develop and train them, make them happy, and engage with the organization will make the huge difference, whether your company will be successful or not. So the first step, as part of this effort, company has to do is they should be able to identify and select the right kinds of people. That's called the staffing, right, in human resource management. So your job is to try to come up with some effective human resource planning so that you can identify that the right group of people on the planning so that you can recruit them. So I want to share that another very interesting, the article came out from that New York Times. Let's see. It's only a couple of years ago. This was a survey of the consulting firm in Germany and also in France. The recruiters, they're going after any graduates from any countries without borders. So companies scout globally. And they actually listed 150 top colleges from which they recruit is the most talented the people. So you might be curious about that. What are those scores, and see if whether LMU was ranked or not. We'll see in a minute. We hope. More recent one, 2015 ranking. Can't see well. So I spent about an hour to try to find the LMU, but not yet. I think it's 151st, right behind the 150. And so U.S., about 1/3 of the listed universities, right, and then accounted for by the U.S. colleges and universities, followed by the British and also German schools, German universities. Let's see. Anyway, believe me, I don't have a time to go through all this list. And then, surprisingly, the Chinese universities that are about the same number, also from Germany. So obviously that there's something that the Chinese are doing right, and the quality of the education they receive is appealing to all these the global recruiters. So we really have to watch that the emerging sort of capability of the Chinese education. And this is just a footnote, but President Obama visited South Korea a few times, you know that? And he actually praised the South Korean education system, not higher education, the secondary education. So higher education, I think that we've done a good job. We are still leading the whole world. But in terms of the secondary education, I think that we still have a lot of room to improve. Okay. I think I'm only going to cover about 1/10 of the material. So once you identify and select, right, these talented, the potentially talented group of people, then you have to groom them, isn't it? So you have to find the right places and allocate these human resources in the right place and develop them. Okay? So training and development is the next, right, the step. As part of your effort for the global talent management. Then I consider this is the most important stage. Engage and retain. So my talk today and mostly will focus on retention of the global the talented people. So what's the use of recruiting the best people? And if you lose them in a year or so. So a lot of companies actually that they emphasize a lot about recruiting and finding out and identifying this potentially that they're great the workforce. But they didn't pay whole much attention to that how they're going to actually retain those talented group of people. So what does globalization mean for talent management? And now, as a manager, okay, and you have to find a way how you're going to leverage the differences and similarities in the diverse global workforces, okay, which are different in terms of their age, gender, and education and culture. So if you're able to find a way to actually they take advantage of all these differences and extract the best out of different workforce, then obviously, you're going to end up with a higher performance. But if you can't do it, then this causes a lot of problem. So this is a challenge, isn't it? And the reason why the retention has become increasingly more important is because of that boundaryless career. In other words, that we have students, the millennial generation or the Generation Y. I don't expect that these students will work for a single company throughout their whole life. Okay, they're going to hop in for the new job probably every other year. And my son already changed that. I don't remember how many jobs he changed after he graduated, and I'm kind of concerned about it, but. He's saying that, as long as I can, show my talent, as long as I can demonstrate my skills and knowledge, that he feels very comfortable. So he already spent 2 years in Japan and came back here and already hired. And so boundless career, I think that it will make that the retention of the globally talented workforce ever more important. So I'll give you just one example, the graph from that EIU. Look at this graph, 1970s. It was a pyramid, right? But 2015, it has become the sort of now almost like a barrel shape. In 2060, I'm not sure how many people will be still. We see it in 2060. It's just equally distributed. So there was quite a significant change in the demographics of the global workforce. Just take a look at the age distribution. So the challenge as a human resource manager is to, again, I would towards by hiring and retain these globally talented people, and you have to come up with a more comprehensive and holistic approach to recruitment that includes company branding. So the company has to work hard to try to improve their image, and also how they're going to screen the potential candidates and assess their skills, and onboarding once they recruit the talented group of people. It is combined with this increasing features of the number of the contingent and part-time on a contract basis. So many people these days they don't expect they're going to have a full-time job, and most of them they start with part-time, and then company will look at their performance, right, in 3 years, 4 years, and then they'll hire and give them a full-time job because the benefits is so expensive. And another thing is that there's a hyper connected to their jobs, so there's very little separation between the work and life. And then even though you're taking a vacation, and then anybody can reach you with a smartphone, or you have to check your email all the time. So we are living in a totally different environment compared to 5 years or 10 years ago. So this is a challenge for the HR managers, and how they're going to design their work demand, and how they're going to find the people who will meet that kind of the demand for the particular the job. The fonts are too small, so you probably can see it. So HR manager's job is, number one, they have to develop some kind of analytics or the metrics so that they can rightly find that the people that can feel the need of the company. So quality and quantity and types of skills available. And also they have to be familiar with the government regulations. And earlier I showed that the New York Times article which talks about that the U.S. the government regulations on immigration. So what kind of visas that they issue, how many visas per year, and etc. So you do have some kind of understanding on the external regulations, and also the cost of labor. But cost of labor, I think that is getting less and less important, and so that's one of the reasons that many of the U.S. companies now coming back to the States, because that the labor arbitrage, that the labor portion of the workers is getting almost at the minuscule or the minimum. So these are some of the mandates or the challenges that where you can you acquire that the globally talented workforce, and how we're going to move the people from one place to another. So in the past, we talked about the brain drain, right? And particularly from the perspective of developing countries, they're concerned about a country like China. Chinese students to go to U.S. and then receive a higher education, and they decided not to return their home country. But a lot of people these days, they actually move back and forth. We call this as brain circulation. So Indians will live in the U.S. for 5 years and going back to India and live there for 5 years. Chinese will do the same thing, and Koreans will do the same thing. So this is a challenge also for the company. And as a person or the individual, they feel very comfortable in both places. That's a good news. But at the same time, how are we going to manage their the compensation, for example, their performance evaluation? So this is the challenge. And also that the global virtual teams, that you don't meet these different group of people all the time, but from time to time that you have to have a video conference and you have to meet in the virtual space, and still you have to have familiar with different cultural values and norms in order to effectively work with other people from different countries. So again, that earlier I mentioned, it is indeed in Asia. That's the part that you will find that more jobs, because that's the area where this actually the global economic engine of growth is generated. So you asked that the Asian executives, about 60% actually, more than 60% of the people said that the cross-border cultural differences is a major challenge. And how they deal with this? They said that these are the sort of what the ways to try to attract globally talented people, providing that competitive training and development, and offering the competitive compensation and benefits, and also that they're concerned about their career path and improving the brand reputation. So a lot of Asian companies that they're working really hard to try to enhance their image or the brand of their company. So I'm sure that everybody knows I'm originally from Korea, so Samsung, they now moved up to the 7th place in terms of their interbrand recognition. They used to be like 20th or 30th place, and then can you guess who's number one brand in the world? Apple, that's right, Apple. Who's second? Google. A good student, yeah, Google. So I hope I'm right. So this is ranking. The number one is the Apple, Google, Coca-Cola, and Microsoft, IBM, and Samsung is the 7th, right? So it's now among the top 10 world brands. So Samsung really works hard to try to move up their ranking. And the big question here, I told you earlier that my presentation will focus on engagement. So how can a company retain talented people? And once you recruit it, you want to make sure they continue to stay with you, not to lose to your competitors. So there has been some study done to try to look at why people are leaving, why you're losing globally talented people. And the answer was the employees' engagement. So when I'm teaching my class, I have to make sure that my students engage with me. It's not easy, right? So you really have to entertain, particularly when you're teaching like 3-hour class. It's not easy. And I'm teaching 8 o'clock, this semester. So I have Gabrielle here. Are you the only one from the class? Okay. Oh, okay, Jason. Okay, sorry. And it is very hard, right, to make my students engaged at 8 in the morning. And then there was some study done actually that the student biocycle at 10 o'clock, we should start the class at 10 or 11. And I'm a morning person, so I get up like 4 or 5, and I can teach at 5, but that's the time they go to bed, right? And and the Gallup polling said that only 13% of the global workforce is highly engaged. 7% rate themselves excellent in measuring, driving, and engagement and retention. 20% reported that they're either poor or there's a lot of room for engagement. So the driving engagement really depends on the corporate culture and identity, and which has to be aligned with their strategy and particularly the leadership. So on the next page, I'm going to share the survey, and according to the survey, and what was that actually they mentioned that among this survey was done using the 3,300 HR managers from about 109 countries. So the results was that it was a culture and engagement. So creating the corporate culture, make sure that you have to have your employees and managers engage with the company. It turns out to be the most important thing that the company has to work. The second one was the leadership, and followed by excuse me, learning and development. So those are the top three most important the things that need to be done by the company. But there's a huge gap as you see it. So on the left axis, we see that these are the very important the dimensions company has to recognize. But on the right side, that whether they are ready and how much they are ready, and as you see that the number in red indicates that there is a huge gap. So a lot of companies actually struggling, try to, for example, create the corporate culture and then make sure that the employees are engaged. They are not able to have done any good job. And also the lack of leadership, which can actually are capable of leading this global workforce. So again, to summarize, it was the culture and engagement and leadership and learning development. Those are probably the three top most important, the urgent priorities. And leadership and learning have increased in importance, but their capability, as you see that in the previous slide, is widening. So you have to do a better job to try to create the corporate culture, and also that they make sure that you have your employees engaged with their work, with their corporation. In order to do it, that you have to have a right kinds of leaders for your company. So can you guess that what percentage of the global leaders, I know that it showed the Gallup poll, but there was another consulting company was done in general. Would you guess that what would be the percentage of the engaged employees for a typical corporation? %? A little better than that. Yeah. Not much, but it's same with my class. And about 20% of my students are usually engaged. They're enrolled, but they're not always they engaged, right? So it's roughly about 21% or 20% how engaged it is a global employees today. And the big question, I think this is an important part that is one of the sort of highlight of my lecture. Why has the problem with the culture engagement become so acute? Anybody can guess? Maybe Dwayne, I'll give you your opportunity. So company needs to spend a lot of money to try to create a culture that make your employees and managers engaged or highly engaged? Okay. Mm. Well, it sounds like that you're mainly talking about the lucrative financial package or the attractive the financial compensation. Then you have to spend money, isn't it? But not necessarily. Mm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes, please. It's already a Q&A session. Yeah. Well, before you recruit and retraining, you're losing the people. And the question here is that why we continue to lose the talented group of people for most companies that after they recruit the potentially the great talented group of people, why they keep losing. And I think that one of the things, they don't understand their employees, their workers. So what I'm trying to say here is that now the company has to understand these employees, they have to think like what the customers. So they have to consider them volunteers, not just workers. Why am I saying that? It's because that now I think that the bargaining power between the employers and employees, to some extent, in a sense, only 5 minutes, wow. It's sort of shifted in favor of the employees, because the employees, that the job can be a product, which means that they are looking at that there are all kinds of what the potential companies that they, who is providing what, and which company is the best for them. So these corporate cultures are continuously debated and shaped and redefine the social networks. That if you visit the Glassdoor, I'm sure that you are familiar that you will see all this evaluation of the people about the company. So I have one example of the Samsung. Samsung only got 3.0 out of 5, and they're very strong in terms of financial package, but they are not as strong as the dimensions. So it is not easy to recruit these group of people. And also, even though the way you said it's money, and that actually I think what's most important is that who set the tone? It's the CEO. It is the top managers. Top managers the one who actually set the tone of the corporate culture. But if the managers a lack of knowledge or understanding about how to work with this global workforce, that the company will never create that kind of corporate culture. As I said earlier, because of the change of the nature of the work or your job, now the work changed the way that how we engage these people. So you have to think about more what flexible work demand, and also, as I said earlier, that the mobility of your work and mobility of jobs, it plays a much bigger role in these days. So as I said earlier, you have to find a way to meet their challenge between their work and their pleasure or their family. And more importantly, the employees' motivation have changed. So young generation, they're saying that what's more important is their work passions than their career ambition, and this is why they're changing job there all the time. And they don't have to work for a company just to try to think about promotion. And instead, how much they like their job is a lot more important and more meaningful for them. So the implication is that now it requires a leadership to focus on making the work environment more enjoyable and compelling. So we all know that everybody wants to work for the Google, and there's a reason why that people want to work for the Google. But that kind of corporate culture is not going to work in some other industries. So each industry, Oracle has a totally different culture. Like Apple, the culture is not really fun. And for those of you who know about Apple, so what company is the great place to work? Okay, the GPTW, they rank these companies, and then they publish the list of companies every year. So again, the lack of leadership is a main reason for engagement gap. So our challenge is that we have to groom the leaders who can lead these different global workforces. So because I already gave me a 2-minute warning or 5-minute warning, and then I'm going to go back to the last page of my a couple more pages. So two key elements of the engagement. So when you say the engagement, there's 2 different levels. The one is that you have to engage with your job. So I like my work, and I can do that better than anybody else, right? So you got to have a maximum job satisfaction about what you're doing, Marky, right? And then also that you feel like that I'm making a great contribution to the organization or the company I'm working for. So I'm helping achieve the goal of my organization. So there's got to be an alignment between that at the personal level, my job satisfaction and my contribution to the organization. So if one of these are lacking, then probably there's a mismatch or the incongruence between your job and then the company you're working for. So in order to meet this challenge, we need to have sort of this. Does that look like a diamond? This is not a half diamond. Feel this sort of the block. So we need a manager who can understand the two seemingly opposing forces. Number one, from the headquarters perspective, and headquarters are always looking for save cost and standardize certain operations. So that's called the global comparative, right? And the other force is what? Local comparative, localization. And you have to create that, any successful factor, but in a different context, different cultural norms and values. That's called the perspective. So perspective is what, we need a manager who has to think right and embracing uncertainty and balancing the tension. And as I said, just the balancing tension between what? Globalization and the localization. The second one is the character. So character has to do with a feeling, your heart. So you got to have an emotional connection with that whoever workforce you're working for. So companies are looking for people who likes to work with the people from different cultures, who just enjoy that, working with somebody from a different cultures. And at the same time, another thing is that the ethical dilemmas. When you're operating in different countries, there's always a challenge that what's considered to be ethical at home, they may not be considered to be ethical in foreign country and vice versa. So you got to have your manager has unwavering integrity and make sure that you're not going to lower your bar when it comes to some important key ethical decision, and particularly when it comes to the core values, the universal values of the people. So you don't want to send the people or hire people, someone that who do not mind that's making any profit out of human misery. That's terrible. So the character is about your heart, and perspective is about your head, and the last one is a savvy, and acting is your hands. So it's like a human body, and you have to have a deep heart, and then cultural the empathy, and who is willing to help out and work with the people that you do not understand or you've never worked with. And the second one that you always have to have the person who has a balance between the linear and non-way of thinking. That's what I mean by the perspectives. And last one is and obviously whoever working in what particular field he or she has to have a deep knowledge about their discipline or their subject, which is the business acumen, and how much support that you're going to get in terms of resources and then human resource the allocations. So I would call that's the savvy, that's an action. So those are hands, right? So you got to have a leader who has a cold and head. Head always have to be cold, right? And warm hearts, right? And somebody who do not mind using hands all the time and working all the time. So the worst case would be someone who has a real poor mindset and working hard, and it's going to just ruin your company. So I better stop it here, and then I have one more slide, but I'll stop it here, and then I'll take the questions from you. Thank you. Yes, please. Okay, so many companies, and actually I've done some consulting with Samsung, so they're going to measure, for example, their relationship with their supervisors and how much support they get their supervisors. And then obviously one thing we can easily measure, are they happy with whatever the compensation they're receiving. So major companies who's operating in across borders, they have already developed these the instruments to measure the engagement level of their employees. Yeah. Okay, Dwayne? Yeah. I'm glad that you forgot that. Yeah, that's right.
So you mentioned about countries like China creating tax incentives and other incentives.
Correct. Yes.
So it's basically like they're subsidized.
Correct. Yeah.
So how much do you think that that subsidy would be good enough for government to, we don't need to do this anymore? And then how does that change the environment?
Okay. Interesting question. You know, China has that huge foreign reserve. They do have money, so I think it will continue as long as that you know, they have enough number of talented growth people, which I don't see in the near future, and they want to continue to upgrade their product, and they want to be global competitors. So in order to achieve the goal, as a government, and I think that it will continue at least 10 or 20 years. So it started like 5 years ago, and I don't see that they're going to, you know, hold back in the near future, because that there's a continued increase that the demand for that kind of jobs, and the government wants to help them. So government is the sort of facilitator of this, helping the companies that they find the right kind of people and the globally talented people. Okay. Ivan? Yeah. Yeah. Sure. Right. Okay. Good. One of the things that, if I just comment on the expatriate management, a lot of companies, they do not send their expat managers for a long period of time. So it has become shorter and shorter. And also we have seen this some kind of a new phenomenon. It is not just sent by the company. It's self-initiated expats. In other words, a lot of people after graduation, they just go out there and experience that, you know, different cultures, and learn about that which country I feel most comfortable with to work. And even some of those expat managers who used to work for the companies that obviously if they don't like the companies, but they're already familiar with the local environment where they've been working, we coined a new term. It's called the expatpreneurs, entrepreneurs, right? Expatpreneurs. So we have seen the increased number of expatpreneurs. So we will see more and more of these people in the future. And all, of course, that we've seen that the increased number of the cross-border mergers and acquisitions. So many of you know that the cross-border mergers and acquisitions that more often than that actually they had failed. And one of the key reasons is because that of their lack of understanding about human resources. You know, you cannot combine these two different companies from a different culture overnight. But most of the U.S. companies, we only do the due diligence from a financial perspective. We just look at the number, right? Dwayne, right? No? And once you actually finish your merger, then we take a look at what kind of people we acquired and how we're going to actually blend these two corporate cultures. And so we've seen there many examples of these, the failure of these cross-border mergers, and then and contingency workforce. Those are I would say that new phenomenon that we've seen for the last decade or so. Last question for you. No, I'm just kidding. No, please.
You showed the slide about the factors of engagement and the rank is important and then the gap.
Correct. Right.
So what do you think the factors are that's creating that gap? It's not just leadership, right?
Well, I think that I mainly attributed, for example, the first one. Let's take a look at the first one, the engagement and what the culture. So the gap is that a lot of leaders in the corporation, they do not know how to create the corporate culture, which is sort of what amenable to have their workers perform their jobs to their, the best that the capability. So it has a lot to do with actually that the lack of the leadership of many corporations, and then they do not understand that how to create a corporate culture which is conducive to elevate the sort of what the level of the efforts, and also that the employees can provide more discretionary efforts. So discretionary efforts means what you don't have to push them, do this and do that on a voluntary basis. They try to do more for their company. But again, as I said, that's mainly the lack of leadership at the top, and that happened to be the major sort of the failure for most companies. Okay, no more Dwayne, and then understand? Ed, yeah. Uh-huh. Good. Well, yeah. My point here is that if you really have something to offer to the company with your skills, with your talent, then you're actually in a better position than most of the other people. So what matters most is that you should be able to demonstrate that what kind of skills that you can offer to the company, and there's got to be a fit and match between the competence and skills you have and the company is looking for. So those people, the companies that you try to get rid of, and even at the university, I guess, that or any organization is the one that who actually they don't feel like that they, we don't need you, and then they're not. They don't have enough sort of I think that the skills or the anything to offer to the organization or the company. So I'm trying to focus on here is that again, a lot of companies that are looking for a people like plumber. This may not be a good example, but actually that one of the article I read talking about the vocational school that were we call the trade schools that some of the community college actually that believe it or not, they have a much rigorous the curriculum of the international business. It's a lot more practical. So there are a lack of number of good plumbers in the U.S. Believe me. So I know this is a higher education organization, so maybe this is not a good example, but that's actually that the article talks about. In fact, that if you do have the right kinds of skills, a lot of companies looking for that kind of talented people, but simply they cannot find it. And you can say the same thing, that any multinational corporations, they're looking for a people who have some kind of language skills and work experience, and someone who has open-mindedness, and obviously that the IT knowledge and etc. And it's not easy to find that kind of combination. That's what they're saying. That a New York Times article talks about is a Mexican student. So he got already undergrad degree from Mexico, and he went to Munich. It's an international technology school in Munich. And he was surprised that in Munich that there was so much demand that for the kind of the people that they're looking for after he graduated with the degree, engineering degree in Munich. So obviously you have to be at the right place at the right time, isn't it? But that's why that I think that now that the glass doors or the Facebook or other kinds of this kind of social network that software will help that these employees to figure out and then screen that the companies that they, I like to work for this company. It really fits me. And once you find that, those kind of people probably has more bargaining power over the companies because he or she already screened out and then they already know what kind of talent they have. So I understand what you're talking about, but I'm a little bit more specific about that. I guess this young generation that who knows how to approach and screen and then evaluate all these different companies, and then they know how to sell their skills and then convince them that I'm the right person to work for your company. You got one ticket already. Okay, yeah, please.
I was thinking about how companies are squeezing more and more. And I was thinking about the difference in the mindset of, say, the boomer generation. The boomers generally speaking, are very loyal to companies.
Right.
So they feel very good about the company that they work for.
Sure.
I'm a Gen Xer. I feel very loyal to the people that I work for. So, really the company doesn't mean that much to me as much as I feel good about who I'm working for.
Okay.
And then Gen Y.
Gen Y. Uh-huh.
They seem to be much more focused on the work-life balance. And so maybe I'm wrong there, but so is that it? First off, is that a U.S. phenomenon? And then also, I find it probably difficult from a leadership standpoint to try to make everybody happy. We've got this mix of generations.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And then internationally, is it that way as well?
Oh.
Or is it really just America?
Well, I think that you can generalize that this is probably applicable to all the other countries. Even though I must say that in the U.S. we don't have the first retirement age, right? So we have a professor over 80 still teaching. I know you're about to retire, but he's not 80 yet. But in Korea, 65, you're out. Okay, so it is different, but at the same time, it creates more challenges in some other countries because in this country, the efficiency and your competence, it is a meritocracy, right? It works in the U.S. It doesn't matter how old you are and who you are and whether you're a woman or a man and etc. But other countries, they limit their human resources because of all these the cultural norms and also the regulations. So I would say, we definitely they have an edge and then more advantage in terms of capitalizing the globally talented work. Everybody comes here because they see the opportunity, American dream, so to speak. Even though that's different from everyone. By the way, my American dream is that I want to be a professional golfer and then win the tournament once. Then I don't have to teach, right? And then so I don't think that's realistic. So that's a very interesting question, Dwayne. And but in
related to this question, because it seems to me that you're a boomer and you're just loyal to your company, regardless of who moves in and out or whatever. You can
Sure.
squeeze that guy. You
Okay.
can work harder and harder for the pay.
Uh-huh.
Keep doing it because that's
Right.
the
Right.
mindset as me.
Mhm.
As long as I like who I'm working for,
Okay.
you're going to squeeze me more and more. But if I'm somebody who just feels like, what, work-life balance is more important than someone else, I don't need to take more than that without sacrificing my life.
Mhm.
It could be harder.
Well, you can ask this the millennial generation, but I think that they want certainly the fast track. They want to have a bigger responsibility and instant gratification, and they want to retire at the age of 30 and then spend the summer in the Bahamas and Bermuda or whatever. I know that. Really? But you're getting too old now, so. But I think that's a pretty good, I guess, description of the different generations. And you're right, absolutely. Particularly Japanese and Koreans the same way that our parent generation, and then I think that I'm boomer, and then most people will work for one company. In Japan, certainly they have a lifetime employment system, which is not going to work here at all, right? Again, young generation they have a different mindset, and that they want to move the company from one place to another all the time. They strongly believe that as long as they have competence, it doesn't matter whether they work for 1 month here or 2 months there, and etc. But at the same time, the bottom line is that you always have to sharpen your knowledge, and then again try to be employable and marketable. That's up to you. So flexibility and education, those are the two sort of wheels that you have to roll and keep rolling in order to make yourself more marketable and employable. Okay, I'm glad to have Dwayne, and it just reminds me of the class we had 10 years ago. Okay, great. Well, thank you so much. Okay, yeah. Thank you. Thanks.
So thank you all for coming. Please, there's still food and wine left. Please enjoy. And if you want to continue the conversation, if you have more questions, you're welcome to stick around and continue talking with Dr. Paik. And we hope to see you at the next faculty pub night in March. So. Oh, yes.
Promotion flyer here. 20% discount.